is Joe Wasserman. Welcome to this edition of Peace is Possible, where we explore peace issues and issues around war and peace that are not being talked about in the mainstream media, or what some people call the corporate media. Today I have Mitch Linck, who's going to be the guest for this episode of Peace is Possible. Mitch Linck is a 31-year-old activist and member of Socialist Action. At 17, he joined the Marine Corps and fought in the war in Iraq. Mitch's experiences in Iraq led him to question the U.S. motivation for going to war and the capitalist system that breeds war, racism, homophobia, and sexism. He is active in the climate justice group 350 Connecticut and works in the solar industry. I also know him to be a hard-working peace activist. So welcome to the show, Mitch.
Thank you.
First of all, tell the audience about your background, if you'd like.
Sure. So I was born actually here in Connecticut,
okay.
And lived here mostly my whole life, except for my military service. So like you said, I joined the Marine Corps when I was 17, and I had really bought into the billion-dollar ad program that you could see through all the commercials and at sporting events, that I was going to go to war and I was going to make a difference in the lives of Iraqis. I was going to keep my country safe, and I was going to bring democracy and freedom. But when I got there, I realized very quickly that that really wasn't what was going on there. We were spending huge sums of money. We definitely weren't making our country any safer by being there. We certainly weren't bringing democracy or freedom to the Iraqi people. And we definitely weren't making the Iraqis' lives any better. And that led me to start to question the motivations for going to war. So I spent about 9 months in Fallujah, Iraq, with 1st Battalion, 25th Marines, which is a reserve unit out of actually Connecticut, and was wounded about 2 months in. So on May 5th, 2006, I was shot by a sniper in the head. I was very lucky to survive, and my unit rushed me to a battlefield hospital where I was looked at. They gave me some stitches, and then I was sent back on patrol a few days later. So I finished my time in Iraq, and upon coming home, I started to think about these questions. Why were we really there? What were the motivations for going to war? Was it even necessary for us to be there? And through thinking about this and reading different opinion pieces and things of that nature, I really realized what the war in Iraq was, more than anything else, was a resource war. It was a way for American corporations and British corporations to control the oil fields in Iraq. And the 1.5 million Iraqi lives that were destroyed, that were ended due to our occupation, the 5,000 plus veterans that died in Iraq or to suicide since they've been home, were all to maintain hegemonic American control of the oil industry and to ensure that oil industry's profits didn't continue to fall. So that led me to question the whole system we live under. So a few years ago, I joined Socialist Action, which is a revolutionary socialist organization that really wants to speak truth to power about the system we live under, provide a vision for a system where human need is taken into account and not corporate profits, and a system where we have democratic control over our workplaces and over the surplus that working people create every day, instead of that surplus being hoarded by a few billionaires.
Thank you. How did you come to see peace as a priority?
Well, there's several reasons peace should be a priority. One, war is a horrific situation. It ruins the lives of people who fight it. It ruins the lives of people who have to experience it. And there's no good reason for an imperialist country to go to war at this point, except to maintain hegemonic control of the resources of other nations. So peace is really a priority because, one, the Pentagon's the biggest polluter on the face of the planet, and as we know, climate change is going to affect the lives of every living person on the face of the planet. If we don't get it under control, it could and the ability for human life to be sustainable on this planet. Two, that to fight and die for a few billionaires to get a few more $1 billion is never a reason to sacrifice your life for. And three, because we have no right to go around the world and tell other countries how they should interact in the world, how they should run their country, how they should organize themselves. That decision is given to none other than the people of that country, the working people of that country. So I think America is the #1 threat to peace in the world, and I think as peace activists and as members of the society, it is our job, it is our responsibility to ensure that we keep U.S. from interfering and economically controlling the future of other countries.
Thank you. Please tell the audience about the March 30th peace rally in D.C. and why we should be concerned about the military expansion of NATO. NATO is a North Atlantic Treaty Organization that was founded during the Cold War but still persists today.
Yeah, so hundreds of organizations have called for an action on March 30th at Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C., and we're planning to be a part of that action here in Connecticut by having people come down. We are planning on having a few buses. But the action was called because every year NATO has a summit meeting. And this year it's happening in Washington, D.C., and it's the 70th anniversary of NATO being formed. Now, everywhere this action is held, whether it's in Europe or here, there are massive protests to say that, one, this organization is increasing tension between us and other countries. Two, that this organization is creating military bases all over the world that are not needed. And three, that this organization really has no reason to exist in a modern world. So on the anniversary of the 70th anniversary of the forming of NATO, there will be several actions in Washington, D.C., and a rally to say that no NATO, close U.S. military bases, and keep U.S. intervention out of Venezuela will be held on March 30th in Washington, D.C.
Great. I would also add to that buses are being organized for people in Connecticut who wish to be a part of this, and we're going to have more information about that later. Tell us about the rally to oppose military intervention in Venezuela on February 23rd. That's Saturday, February 23rd.
So February 23rd at noon, there will be a rally at the Federal Building in Hartford and on the Green in New Haven. And this is a rally to show the folks in power that, one, Americans are done with interventionist wars around the world. Two, that we have no right to intervene in Venezuela. The working people of Venezuela are the ones who should be deciding how their country is run. And three, to protest the sanctions and the support of an unelected U.S. puppet that has claimed the presidency, quote unquote, of Venezuela, and to say that the sanctions are creating a humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. It is not the fault necessarily of the Venezuelan government, but it is really U.S. pressure to ensure that a coup can take place against the democratically elected president of Venezuela.
Yes, and I think we have to be very careful of the information we're getting in the mainstream media about Venezuela, as in other places. Mm-hmm. We get a very highly one-sided picture so many times, and that leads us into justifying military intervention.
Absolutely. Just as the corporate media lied to us about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq to get us into a resource war so the American population would support it, so too the corporate media and the administration will lie about what's happening in Venezuela to fool the American people into being behind this interventionist policy. So we fell for it once and we can't fall for it again. So we need to come together, show solidarity with the Venezuelan people, and say U.S. hands off Venezuela.
Thank you. Tell us about your candidacy for the U.S. Senate.
So this was last year. I decided to run against Chris Murphy for the United States Senate position in Connecticut, and we did so on an all-volunteer basis. We didn't take any donations except from individuals in small amounts. And we had to petition to get on the ballot. So in Connecticut, we have a very archaic system of petitioning to be able to even show up on November 7th, on Election Day. So we had to gather 7,500 signatures from valid registered voters in Connecticut. We collected 11,000 by a small handful of us going out every day after work, on weekends, to every festival and every place we could possibly go to ask people to support a third-party choice on the ballot. We collected about 11,000 signatures, which was more than any other petitioning candidate that year did. Most petitioning candidates have a validation rate, so those signatures are checked to make sure they are registered voters, in fact. Most candidacies have a validation rate of somewhere from 85 to 95%. Our validation rate was 57%. So we did not make it on the ballot, unfortunately. But we were running not necessarily to win, not necessarily to take office, but to say loudly and clearly that working people's power does not come from legislative halls in Washington, D.C. It comes from organized groups, being organized in your community, in your neighborhood, in your workplace, at your school, organizing and making the demands that you need for your life to be more sustainable, to be better. And that's how things change in this country, is by making social movements, by building bridges with grassroots organizations, and to show that the oppression of all is linked to the oppression of others. And to show that working people create all the value in society, and working people should be deciding what happens with that value.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Tell us about your understanding of what the roots of war and the war machine are.
Yeah, absolutely. So the roots of the war machine in the United States, I believe, is fundamentally because we are an imperialist country, that we need to go and ensure that we can get cheap resources from the rest of the world to maintain American control of the economy worldwide. So just like in Iraq when we went to war, it was not about freedom. It was not about democracy. It was really about getting control of the oil fields there to ensure that American business can continue to be profitable. And we're going to continue to do that because of the system we live under. So I think that's the same thing that's happening in Venezuela. I think that's the same thing that happened in Libya. I think that's the same thing that's happening in Afghanistan. So we are going to have to continually create boogeymen around the world to justify going into those countries, extracting their resources without their consent, without them benefiting from their own natural resources, to ensure that capitalism continues to thrive in this country, to ensure that not the needs of Americans are taken into account, but that a few billionaires can put a few more zeros in their checkbook. And fundamentally, that is what all of our institutions revolve around. That's why we see the militarization of the police and the over-patrolling of black and brown communities. That's why police officers are almost never held accountable when they shoot a young black man. So I believe that the war machine is inherent to capitalism, it's inherent to the system we live under, and it will continue to perpetuate itself so long as we don't stand up and fight back.
Okay. What did the corporate media miss in its coverage of the Iraq War?
A lot, quite a bit. So I think the corporate media did first off, the American people, a massive disservice in lying about weapons of mass destruction and propagating what the administration's claims were of those weapons, and really scaring the American people into, one, even getting into the war in Iraq. Also, I think the corporate media did a terrible job really covering just how bad the occupation and war were for the Iraqi people. Some estimates say that there were at least 1.5 million Iraqis killed by American troops or the coalition that invaded Iraq. And three, I think the coverage of veterans has been pretty terrible as well. They cover it as though we're victims or as though we're scarred and that we're unjustly angry perhaps. But what I think the corporate media is failing to acknowledge, and they failed to acknowledge this in Desert Storm, they failed to acknowledge this during Vietnam, and they failed to acknowledge it in Korea. is that when you go to a country and you are asked by your government to do terrible things, that has a toll. And being able to square the idea of the terrible things you did with the idea that you're still a good person, that you still have value, is very difficult. So the media is quick to cover post-traumatic stress disorder and talk of how veterans are easy to anger or are depressed or what have you. But I think the suicide epidemic, did you know 22 veterans in this country a day commit suicide?
No, I was not aware of that
Yeah,
figure.
22 veterans a day commit suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's because most of us know that we did horrible things to make a few people richer.
Mm-hmm.
That the scars of war, while small in comparison for us, compared to the people in Iraq, to square the idea that you're a good person that has value with the idea that you did these terrible things for no good reason is very difficult. And I think the corporate media misses that as well.
Thank you. Tell us about the student and youth organizing you've been doing.
So I work with a group called Youth for Socialist Action out of UConn, and it's a grouping of a bunch of young folks at college who want to fight back against the system the same way I do, that want to organize working people to be able to control our own future instead of a couple millionaires and billionaires deciding what happens. They're a great group of young folks, and I help them come up with ideas for classes or forums, and generally just help be a support system off campus where I can be. And they're a great group of young people who are, give me a lot of hope for the future, to see how they see the world, to see that they're not buying into a lot of the corporate propaganda that comes up against socialism or about Venezuela or what have you. I think they really have the ability to really change the situation we live under.
Good. So how can people become involved?
There's a lot of ways to become involved. So one, talk about this stuff with your friends, your coworkers, your family, and try to explain why what's happening in Venezuela is what's happening. Join us on February 23rd in New Haven or Hartford at the Capitol building around noon to show that the American people aren't going to be fooled by this again, that the American people aren't going to put up with another interventionist war that does nothing for society. It does no good for any normal, regular human being. Join us on the bus to March 30th to protest in Washington, D.C. against NATO's expansion and aggression, and to protest, again, the intervention in Venezuela. Contact us, get involved, learn about this stuff, and come out to the rallies, come out and show your support.
Okay, so who should people contact? Tell us.
Well, there's Facebook events for both March 30th and February 23rd up. People can email me at mitch.linck@gmail.com. That's mitch.linck@gmail.com. They can get involved with the Connecticut Peace and Solidarity Coalition. They can get involved with a variety of peace organizations. But that's the best way to get involved, is to come together, make decisions about what the most important things are to focus on, and then plan actions to show those in charge that we're not gonna deal with this anymore. We're not gonna be fooled.
Yeah, there's also Hope Out Loud.
Hope Out Loud.
Go to Hope Out Loud. You could Google that, and that on that website there's information too about the rally in Washington, and perhaps there'll be also information about February the 23rd rally as well to stop U.S. military intervention in Venezuela. So my information too, and I'm involved with the Peace and Solidarity Coalition, is joewass64@yahoo.com, joewass64@yahoo.com. My phone number is 860-561-1897. So you could also contact me as well, and I could put you in contact with the Peace and Solidarity Coalition, and we meet pretty much every second Saturday of the month. I could fill you in on that if you give me a call or email me. And if your email again, please?
Is mitch.linck@gmail.com. That's mitch.linck@gmail.com.
Okay, and we'll repeat it one more time in the next few minutes, so you get a paper and pencil out if you wish. So what do you feel what do you feel that should be, what do you feel is the highest priority right now?
So I think with the looming threat of intervention in Venezuela, I think that's the priority right now for peace and for activism. But that's not to say that other things can't be focused on as well. I think really the key to activism and the key to organizing is to build bridges to show people that that oppression is linked. And it's linked to the system that we live under. So just like war and climate go hand in hand, if there's more war, there will be more warming. War and the militarization of our police and the absolute horrendous nature of policing in this country, especially in Black and brown communities. I think the number one thing we can do is start to get out of our silos, the peace silo, the environmental silo, the social justice silo, and come together and say, all right, these things all go hand in hand. How can we organize and lift the voices that haven't been heard before? How can we make sure that the movement looks as diverse as our society does? How can we make sure that we're projecting the voices of those who are most marginalized and really come together and organize around a common set of demands? And I think those demands should be democratically voted on. I shouldn't be the one making those demands. We should make a broad coalition of folks. And they're the ones that should be, that coalition should decide what demands look like. So that has been the experience of people in other countries organizing. That's been the experience here organizing. I think we've forgotten our roots. We don't really have social movements in this country like we used to. The movement for labor rights in the 1930s and 40s, the movements against racial discrimination and segregation in the 50s and 60s, the movement for women's rights in the 1970s, and the LGBTQI community in the 80s and 90s. I think we've forgotten where our power comes from, and it's being organized in the streets. It's not voting for this or that candidate. It's not, begging those in charge to do what we want. It's getting out in the streets and demanding. And I think we're starting to see that again in this country. There were 4 million people in the streets protesting for women's rights the day after Trump's inauguration. We haven't seen a protest like that in this country in decades. So we need to take that energy, continue to build it, continue to expand it, show that our oppressions are linked, make sure the most marginalized voices are out front talking about their experience, and really come together and make some serious demands.
Okay, so why don't we repeat the contact information? First I'll repeat mine. Again, I'm with the Peace and Solidarity Coalition that's working on the peace rally in DC on March 30th, and also supporting the vigil, the rally regarding Venezuela on February 23rd. And you can reach me at joewass64@yahoo.com. And my phone number is 860-561-1897. That's joewass64@yahoo.com. And if you could repeat your information.
Absolutely. Mitch.linck@gmail.com. mitch.linck@gmail.com.
Great. I hope people got the contact information. And also you could follow us at the Hope Out Loud website. That's the other thing to make note of. There's information posted there about the rallies. And the bus information. We're organizing buses to go down to this rally in Washington, D.C. as well. So please be connected, and you could also join us for our monthly meetings as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do hope you join us. I do hope you see peace as a priority like we do. And I do hope that we can come together and build a new, vibrant, diverse anti-war movement.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Mitch, for your work. I happen to, I see him working, I see Mitch working, and he has so much energy, and he's very dedicated to peace and to looking at the systemic questions that sometimes are hidden in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think a new world's possible. I think a world centered around human needs with democratic control of our industry could really change how humanity functions on this planet. And I think, if nothing else, we need to do away with the system we currently live under. It causes so much misery around the world. And I think that people understand this, and I think people are starting to come to it in a real way. And I think all we need to do is come together, find our similarities, and find our voice and demand change.
Yes. Yeah, please join us. We need to build a movement of peace and justice, and it's got to happen from the grassroots. It's got to happen from ordinary people who are questioning why the drums of war are constantly beating, or questioning the narrative given to us by the mass media, which is often owned by few corporations, and often gives us a highly one-sided view, as in the lie about the weapons of mass destruction that the American people were pounded with prior to the opening of the war. We were pounded with this every day: weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And then we found we were lied to. And then we were lied to about Vietnam so many times. So we need to really scrutinize when we're being sent into war. Thank you.